Got it, Matt. Let's bring in Dan Morgan. He's a portfolio manager at Synovus Trust Company, which manages $7.5 billion in assets. Dan, good to have you back here with Matt and myself. A lot of macro issues out there, whether you're talking about the debt ceiling, what's going on in Europe, worries about slowdowns in global economic growth. Add that all up, and what's your outlook on the markets right now?
Well, I think we're kind of up against a brick wall here. I mean, you've got the negatives that you're just talking about, but we're going to know a little bit more in a couple minutes here with Google coming out with earnings. And, you know, Q2 numbers should be pretty decent now, the S&P 500. So, you know, if you look at fiscal year growth in terms of S&P earnings, you're looking for about 17% for 2011. So we have these overhangs, these negatives that you just mentioned and you were just talking about with your previous guest. But, you know, trying to be optimistic that if we get good numbers here over the course of the next 2 weeks and we get some good guidance, then maybe that'll pick the market up a little bit after it's kind of running out of speed after the comments that came out of the Fed earlier this week.
Because right now joining us on the phone is Joel Achramowicz. He's an analyst for Blaylock Robert Van. His calls on Google, by the way, have produced some of the best returns among analysts that cover the stock, so the perfect person to talk to. So, Joel, Google looks like they're shooting it right out of the park here. I mean, what's your initial reaction to the numbers?
Well, yeah, they certainly seemed like I think that's a good analogy. They hit the cover off the ball in this particular quarter. I mean, based on our expectations, and even with the significant increase in operating expenses, the top line was very handsome.
Hey, let me throw some other numbers at you. Second quarter cost per click rose 12%. I guess the estimate out there was about a 7.5% increase. Paid clicks rose 18% versus an estimate of 16.8%. So again, these numbers, second quarter revenue, as Julie broke down, backing out those traffic acquisition costs, that came in at $6.92 billion versus $6.57 billion. Again, these are strong numbers for Google. What about all the costs we were worried about?
Well, I mean, they're there, but I mean, the top line was very strong here, and obviously costs are under control. So, I mean, it's certainly in the paid in the cost per click area. So, I mean, I'm very impressed with the numbers. I mean, considering you know, we've been in a neutral in the stock, and I mean, these kind of numbers would cause us, I think, get more perhaps a little bit more aggressive with our rating on the stock at this point.
Hey, Dan, I want to bring you into this because you own this stock. It's on your buy list, Dan Morgan. You're hearing these numbers from Google. Makes you pretty excited that you own the stock here.
Yeah, that's good numbers, Carol. I think one key figure we're looking at, too, was what was going on with operating margin. We saw it slip a little bit from the first quarter. It was 49%. I think the street was looking at 48%. We've talked a lot about the increase in costs that Google has undergone to get involved in competing against Facebook and adding to their workforce and all these new areas that they're getting into. So I think when we whittle those numbers down a little bit later, we're going to be focusing on what's going on with that overall operating margin, and is it higher than 48%? I think that's going to be a key number for the stock. But you're right, Carol, initially it looks like a great number, and this is a great way to kick off technology in terms of earnings season, because we've got Apple and Intel and Microsoft and IBM all be coming in next week. So hopefully this is the beginning of a good trend, and the market should react positive, hopefully, to this Google number and good numbers next week.
I just wanted to point out something. When Dan was talking about the operating margin number, I looked in the release to see if I could locate that. So it looks like the operating margin on a GAAP basis about 31.9%, on a non-GAAP basis, which is how we tend to look at these numbers, almost 37%, about 36.7%. So Dan, I'm curious, I mean, you talked about 48, which this is obviously not to that level yet, but what's your reaction to that number?
Well, I mean, the margins are a key feature because, as you've been talking about, the increase in expenses with the headcount and all the things they're doing. So I want to try to dig a little bit deeper into the gross margin, operating margin, kind of see what's going on with those figures. And I know the expectations were that Q1 to Q2 we were going to see a slight decrease in margin. So I'd have to kind of look at the numbers that you're talking about. Obviously, there's different ways to cast them in terms of GAAP and non-GAAP and so forth. But I think that margin number is something everyone's going to be really focused on the conference call and kind of the after reaction to the stock once we get all the figures in.
All right, so Dan, we're going to focus on that operating margin number on that call. What about Larry Page? A man of few words in the last earnings call. Do you want to hear more from him as head of this company? And you own the stock, so do you want to hear more?
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to get more color in terms of what's going on with the company and what they're doing. We have some idea, but we'll just have to see going forward how much they're willing to reveal on the call and give us indications of the things that they're working on. So hopefully we'll get more color here in the next hour or so.
I'm going to jump in here. You know, this is certainly a very good quarter for Google, surprising the street. You can see the reaction in the stock. But to play devil's advocate, I mean, this is also coming after several disappointing quarters. When you're listening to that call today, what do you want to hear from management about their non-search businesses? That clearly has been a big question as to how that's going to play into Google's future growth.
Dan, Dan, that's for you. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, everyone is trying to see how the company can continue to grow beyond what we know they do, which is people go into Google and they look for things and they have ads and stuff associated with that. And they've been talking about their initiative to compete against Facebook and some of these other avenues. So, you know, that's obviously critical for any of these big bellwether technology companies in terms of their ability to expand beyond their core business. So
Dan,
we'll learn more.
Dan, we've got to run. Dan Morgan, we're continuing on Google.